Today I'm meeting Sid Serawat, the multi-award-winning restaurateur and chef with restaurants Cassia, Sadat and the French Cafe. Welcome to Namaste New Zealand, Sid. Thanks so much for making time for us today.
My pleasure.
So when you first started out in the hospitality and restaurant industry in New Zealand, what were the common sort of misconceptions that people had when it came to Indian food?
When we first came to New Zealand, there was no real kind of formal dining Indian places. Even now, there's not many. It was just your takeaway or a restaurant where you could dine in BYO, $10, $15 for some kind of main course. But now I think people are very open to trying food the way it should be, whether it's Indian, Italian, Thai. People want to see the boundaries pushed as much as possible.
So simplicity in Indian food, not necessarily seen together very often, aren't they? I mean, what's your take on that?
Indian looks so simple, but I think it's one of the most complex cuisines, a bit like Thai, or where there's so many layers of flavor, but when you eat it, it might be just a curry, but it can take up to 4 or 5 hours to sometimes even a couple of days while the sauce is being prepared. And then obviously the marinades and the textures and the flavors you put together are unbeatable.
And do you often find that, in your renditions of, modern Indian or Indian fusion, do you find that there might be trade-offs in terms of authenticity or willing trade-offs, as you may, to actually adapt to local palates and perhaps local ingredients? So how do you sort of strike that balance?
So when we wanted to open Cassia, we wanted it to be modern Indian. So we wanted all the produce, or majority of the produce, from New Zealand. We just couldn't get the spices here, so that's what comes from India. And the techniques as European as possible. So we wanted best of both worlds to kind of be together. And it was a real interesting kind of learning time for us as well, where we were learning the palate of New Zealand and the spice. Spice doesn't mean chili every time. Spice means aromatic. And initially, when we opened Cassia, I was cooking food, or the team was cooking food to my palate, which was very spicy. Which we had to dumb down a little bit and have it to a certain thing. But when you go to a restaurant and it says medium, mild, or hot, that should not be there, because it just ruins the dish.
So for any foodie or chef or restaurateur for that matter, New Zealand has, bountiful fresh produce from, especially the seafood, the meat, and obviously the vegetables as well. So how does your food sort of reflect and embrace all of this?
Our food is definitely influenced by the seasons, so whatever you find on the menu will always be in the peak of that time of the year.
Right.
And same with the seafood, meat. We try and use the best producers in the country and cooking it with a lot of respect.
It's interesting you say seasonal, because a lot of Indian traditional food is actually very, very seasonal. I mean, you only cook what you get during the season. The whole idea of preservation and availability is almost, traditionally was non-existent.
Absolutely. And so it's, like Cassia, there's a lot of signature dishes, so it's hard to change the sauces, but we can definitely change the fish. So, if snapper's good today, that's what we get. If harpaka is better tomorrow, or that's what they catch in the morning, that's what we get.
I've heard you're a bit of a stickler for perfection. Does that also mean, it's a nicer way of saying you're just really strict in the kitchen?
I think you have to be strict in hospitality because there's certain standards and discipline you need to follow. My father was in the army, so that's where I learned a lot of my discipline and work ethic. And I think if you want to achieve perfection, you have to have certain standards and precision. And that's the whole team. They're all very, very passionate about what they do. They're perfectionists, and I sort of just kind of come in and out of the restaurants and just be with them.
Did you ever think that this is where you'd be one day? I mean, what were your earliest sort of childhood, recollections of what you envisioned yourself becoming? Was a chef, or what was it? How did it all begin?
So my dad wanted me to be in the army because he was in the army for 35 years, which I did not really have much of a passion for. Then he tried to make me a golfer as well. And again, I didn't have the patience. I didn't really want to study too much. And then when I saw there was a course in hospitality, at quite a young age, I sort of followed that and went into being a chef. I was 17 at that time, so did my apprenticeship in the Middle East and then moved to New Zealand in 2000.
What is it about cooking that still keeps you, going at it really after all these years?
It's about the cooking, and I think it's the more the profession. It's, when you make so many people happy every day, it's that energy and that excitement that adrenaline you get from the service every day in the kitchen, the long hours everyone puts in, but still very high energy, and still about perfecting it day in, day out, and evolving it at the same time is what makes it one of the best professions in the world.
Yeah, you speak about repetition quite a bit, but what about the creativity of it? I mean, I suppose you ought to be creative if you were a chef, but to get something right, you only get it through repetition. So how do you kind of strike that balance between, you know?
Well, we're constantly creating. So again, we're always thinking about the seasons, and we're planning it a little bit ahead. So when summer's going to come, we already start thinking of the dishes we want to change and evolve. So you'll never find anything on the menu that's not in season, because that just doesn't eat as well as something that's in its prime. So that's where our creative thing comes in, where all the head chefs are really strongly involved with me, and we're constantly researching different techniques.
So what would you be if you weren't a chef?
I'd love to be a tennis player, because that's something that it really excites me, and I do miss playing it now, but hopefully in the next couple of years I'll get back into it.
Might make the veterans team someday.
Yeah, maybe.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a real pleasure, Sid.
My pleasure. Thank you.
This programme was made with the support of New Zealand On Air.